All right, good evening. Hey, ho, let's go. You know, if it weren't for Johnny Ramone, I would have come here not knowing who Brenda Lee was. But that's part of the story you'll get in a bit. And yeah, I do have a mohawk. And no, I didn't get it to pose up here as a punk rocker for this exalted occasion. It actually stemmed from my frustration of world events and bombings and things like that, and I took it out on my own hair. And sometimes you feel powerless and you do sometimes silly things. But 2 days after it was done, I walked into a shop to buy a Christmas gift back in November, and I was accused of shoplifting. So even though the Ramones tonight are being inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it doesn't mean that punk rockers are looking like a punk rocker has become respectable. The Ramones didn't need mohawks to be punk. They never had one. I don't think anyone in the band ever had one. They were visually aggressive. They were for working class construction worker delinquents from Forest Hills, Queens. Yeah. Who were armed with 2-minute songs that they rattled off like machine gun fire. And it was enough to change the Earth's revolution, at least the music of the time. It was an assault. Someone asked Johnny Ramone once why the songs were so short. He said they're actually fairly long songs played very, very quickly. First time I saw the Ramones, I was pretty young, and before the show even started, I was trying to get closer and closer, and got up to the stage, and as I'm up there packed and ready and even a little bit nervous, I mean, just the crowd was intense, the look of the crowd. Outcasts, one and all. They were, hardcore punkers with spikes on their jackets, chains on their boots, even skinheads and horror film fans, nerds and geeks and outcasts that were all ready to get out all their aggression in the next hour and 15 minutes. I remember this as I was getting closer. I saw the microphone stand. Something really strange about the microphone stand in the middle, and that it was about 10 feet high. Something really strange about that. I saw a roadie put the set list down. He stood up, and he was half the size of the microphone stand. I thought, who the fuck is going to sing at that microphone stand? It was very unsettling. And then looking at the amount of amps that they had symmetrically placed on either side, and knowing that there was a huge amount of volume that was going to come out of that, it was very unsettling. And then the lights go out, and they start playing the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then the crowd starts getting into third and fourth gear, and then they come out, and 1, 2, 3, 4 into the first song. And all hell broke loose. It was complete chaos. The guy with the boots with the chains all of a sudden were right in front of your face, swinging by, and it was terribly frightening and totally blissful at the same time. So I think of the amount of intensity in that show and that one night, and I think of how many times that happened. The Ramones played 2,269 shows. J-Lo's got a lot of catching up to do. And speaking of J-Lo, disco was huge in the 70s. Disco took over the clubs and the airwaves along with the indulgent guitar solos and 7-minute songs that was the musical landscape of 1976. Ramones made a record in 1977. There's a black and white photo of 4 guys in leather jackets, all with the last names, Converse shoes and jeans standing against a brick wall. And this became a beacon for anyone who ever wanted to be in a band, those disenfranchised by the dynasties of giant rock bands. They obliterated the mystique of what it was to play in a band. You didn't have to know scales. I mean, with the knowledge of 2 bar chords, you could play along with their records, and that's what people did. They sat in front of their parents' hi-fis and played along with Road to Ruin or It's Alive record, and within weeks, they were starting bands with other kids in town who were doing the same thing. All of a sudden, you could be on stage getting out, saying what you feel, sing about sniffing glue, and not be a virtuoso, not be genetically gifted with Elvis's cheekbones either. You could look like an outcast and still be cool. Talking Heads were the same way, or same thing in a different way. Yeah, it's a great night. But the Ramones were a blueprint so necessary at the time. I mean, that fact alone is so important for everything that came after. Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth was saying that he can't think of a band or a musician these days where the Ramones weren't a very important part of their life. John McBain, a great musician from Seattle that I know, said something, and I think he spoke for the whole Seattle community, that the Ramones were our Beatles. Going back to that time in CBGB's New York scene, Patti Smith said it was a reclamation of rock and roll, that we created it and we're going to take it back. Let's take it over. Yeah. I'm up here for a bit. I need to... and it may have to happen again, because Thurston and I were talking, and now it's Disney kids singing songs, the Disney kids singing songs written by old men and being marketed to 6- and 7-year-olds. So some kind of change might have to happen again soon. But that's a whole nother thing. So after the initial surge of the late 70s, commercially the Ramones were never embraced. Bands around them were, but never them. Virtually ignored by radio, 80s MTV, and even other artists. They never stopped, and regardless, have a following worldwide that's as devoted as ever. I went with them once to South America. There's 50,000 people, riots for tickets, screaming fans outside. It was the reaction I always thought they deserved. And when punk finally broke in '91, the Ramones still weren't brought along for the ride, even though the bands Nirvana, Rancid, Green Day wouldn't have existed without them. Punk bands now sell 10 times with one record, their first or second record, sell 10 times the amount of records that the Ramones did throughout their career with 20-something records. And that's why I go over to Johnny Ramone's house and do yard work 3 times a week, just to absolve some of the guilt. And a bunch of people do it, like Bono and Edge do the windows. Kirk Hammett, the guitar player from Metallica, he dusts, house cleans, makes French toast. That's a true story. Even Kurt Cobain wanted to be as good as the Ramones. The list is endless. Turn page. So they never had a top 10 hit. You know it's crazy when Phil Spector produces your record and you still don't have a top 10 record. But it's really circumstantial. It doesn't matter. It doesn't alter the fact that they were one of the most important bands in rock and roll. And they accomplished a lot, for a punk band when most of the others, like Sex Pistols, were all crash and burn. Most punk bands were pretty much crash and burn. And, in the Sex Pistols case, thank you, Malcolm McLaren, for being an ego-driven fool. Fuck for the non-edited version of this VH1 televised event. They existed for 22 years with the same level of intensity the whole time. And they may not have gotten along the whole time, but that was touring for 22 years in a van, for fuck's sake. So you have to understand. It's a highly respectable thing to travel in a van, not go up to a tour bus, not get your separate planes because you don't get along with the other guys in your band. It's torturously insane to stay in a van for 8 years, but they did it. And even after Dee Dee left the band, who was such a huge part of the band, he still wrote songs for him, which I think speaks to the brotherhood they had, an intense brotherhood of sorts. And I have to mention, after Dee Dee left, there were some intense shoes, Converse shoes to fill. And the guy who did it, his name is CJ, and for whatever reason, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame chose not to include him with those being inducted. It's a Hall of Fame thing. I wouldn't understand, but he played 800-something shows. He participated in 3 or 4 records, wrote a lot of songs, and really importantly, he was accepted by the hardcore Ramones fans. He also played at a time when the Ramones kept playing and were able to play for another generation because of CJ. And CJ's been working 12-hour days cleaning pollution out of the air ducts down around the World Trade Center. And he's here tonight. He might not get up here, but I was going to ask him to stand up and be recognized. CJ Ramone. I'll mention that Johnny Ramone's been an extremely, extremely great friend. His wife and he have been such a great friend to me and taught me a lot about music. I was too young to see. Going back to the Brenda Lee comment and Gene Pitney, I was introduced to them by John. He's been a tutor of sorts, and the guy saw Hendrix and was sitting down. The whole crowd was sitting down. He saw the Who open for the Doors. He himself has more information than probably the institution to which he's being inducted into tonight. Okay, at this point, I've spoke long enough where you could have played 3 or 4 Ramones songs. And after this, I'm sure the evening will move quickly. But it's the Ramones and it's punk rock, and I'm just about finished, and I hope you're okay with that. Apparently you're not. Fuck you. Take it easy, Eddie. All right. The last thing I was going to say was about the Ramones. Manager Gary Kerr first talked to me, and he said that there was a night back in December of the year 2000, and he got a phone call from Joey Ramone, and Joey had had an accident in front of his apartment and slipped and fell on some ice, and was I guess he was just laying there for a bit, and tangled up. He ended up breaking his hip, and he couldn't. He wasn't getting any help. People were just walking by and either side of him, and he was pretty upset by it. You know, at the end, I guess he called Gary, saying, you know, the worst part about it was no one would help me. You know, we were just down, no one would help me. And maybe they didn't know it was Joey Ramone. But he's tangled in black hair, and they think he's a bum or whatever. But in a way, it's only mentioned because it's kind of analogous to like the Ramones' career in a way. And you know, it's hard. That's why tonight's you know, and then obviously Joey died on Easter of 2001, less than a year ago. And I'm sure he would have loved to be here tonight. But you know, the only reason I mention that is that that's why tonight's really important and special, is because I'm sure there's a number of bands and people who will never get to be up here and never get to be, you know, brought up in front of all you people and applauded. And I thought that would probably happen with the Ramones, and the fact that something very unusual is happening here tonight, and that this industry is paying some respect to the Ramones. So with the power invested in me, I'd like to induct Joey, Johnny, Dee Dee, Tommy, Marky, CJ, which you've talked about, the Ramones.